It had been 2 decades since my sister Ellie disappeared in the North Woods, but not a day went by that I didn't think about her. The mystery of what happened to her out there has haunted me since I was 12 years old. She was all I had left in the world back then, and losing her changed the course of my life forever. Ellie was my whole world growing up. Our parents died when I was too young to even remember them, so it had always just been the two of us. She was 5 years older than me, practically an adult in my young eyes. Even as a kid, she had this fiery, adventurous spirit that I always struggled to keep up with. Her long red hair and infectious laugh remain etched in my memory to this day. We depended on each other while growing up in our small hometown of Blackwood, nestled at the edge of the remote North Woods. I idolized Ellie. She was the bravest, most daring person I knew. She was always dragging me out on her grand adventures, into the surrounding countryside and forests. It was on one of those adventures that she disappeared when she was 17. I still feel haunted by my failure to protect her that day. It had been Ellie's idea to spend that weekend camping in the North Woods. She was obsessed with exploring the most remote parts of the forest that the locals avoided. I begged her not to go, feeling uneasy about being so far from town, but I could never talk Ellie out of anything once she set her mind to it. We hiked for hours through dense woods until the trees opened up into a beautiful valley with views for miles. This was where Ellie declared we would make our camp for the night. I helped her pitch the tent while she gathered firewood and regaled me with her favorite ghost stories. I always got scared, even though I knew they couldn't be real. After all, Ellie promised she would protect me, and I believed her. We stayed up late laughing and telling stories by the campfire. The dark forest surrounded us on all sides, with nothing but stars above us. Being out there always gave Ellie a look of freedom and belonging that she never had in town. I eventually drifted off to sleep in my sleeping bag, with her by my side, keeping watch. When I awoke, just before sunrise, Ellie was gone. Her sleeping bag was cold and empty. I called out her name, thinking she had just wandered off for a walk or gone to explore, as she often did, but shouting into the morning mist was met only with silence. An awful dread came over me, even as I told myself there was no need to panic. I spent all morning searching the campsite and the woods nearby, yelling for Ellie until my voice went hoarse, but it was like she had vanished into thin air. As reality set in that something was very wrong, I was overtaken by guilt and anguish. How could I have let this happen? I knew we never should have come out here. I abandoned camp and ran all the way back to town for help. In the weeks that followed, the police searched the entire area extensively but found no trace of my sister. No clues were ever uncovered to explain her bizarre disappearance. The longer it went on with no signs of her or any leads, the less hope they held out that she was still alive. I refused to accept she could be gone. I knew in my heart she must be out there somewhere, relying on me. I just had to find her. After 20 years with no closure, most residents had accepted we would never know what exactly happened on that trip. But while their fascination faded, the wound for me has never healed. My failure to save Ellie still consumes my every waking moment. A darkness has settled on my soul from the guilt and not knowing. But now the nightmares have started. Horrible visions of Ellie lost in the shadows, crying out to me to come find her. The nightmares had been getting worse for months. Ever since the 20th anniversary of Ellie's disappearance, I couldn't shake the visions that haunted my sleep. Her face flickered across the shadows, calling out to me from the darkness. I would run through the black forest, searching for her. Hearing her screams echo all around me in the night. But I could never reach her. I would jolt awake at dawn, trembling and drenched in a cold sweat. During the day, I struggled to keep the disturbing images out of my mind. But come nightfall, the cycle would start again. Deep down, I knew these weren't just dreams. They were a sign I could no longer ignore. A calling, summoning me back to those cursed woods. My wife Maggie eyed me with concern as I sat drinking coffee one morning after another restless night. The nightmares again? I just nodded, staring down into my cup in silence. We had met a few years after Ellie vanished, when I was in my early 20s. Maggie was patient and kind, always trying to get me to move on from the past. But she knew not to push me to talk about it. "You're going back there, aren't you?" she finally asked. I sighed, glancing up to meet her worried gaze. "I have to. The dreams mean something. I can feel it." Maggie shook her head, fear clouding her eyes. "It's been 20 years, Jason. I know you miss her, but I think you need to let this go. Ellie wouldn't want you torturing yourself like this." Despite her pleading tone, my mind was made up. The visions were a sign it was time to confront this demon that had been haunting me for over half my life. "I'm sorry, Mags, but I have to know what happened to her. If there are answers out there, I have to try and find them. For both our sakes." Maggie started to argue, but knew it was pointless. Once I made a decision, that was it. "Just promise you'll be careful. Don't take any stupid risks trying to chase ghosts." "I promise," I assured her. But we both knew my promises meant little where Ellie was concerned. Nothing would stop me from pursuing her again. The next morning I packed supplies and gear into my truck. As I tossed in my sleeping bag, a memory flashed through my mind. The last morning I awoke in these woods, finding Ellie gone. A chill ran down my spine, even in the morning sun. Had she felt this same dread, realizing something was horribly wrong, that she was suddenly alone out there? I forced the dark thoughts aside and focused on the task ahead. This trip wasn't about the past. It was about discovering the truth once and for all. Maggie came out on the porch as I loaded the last of my gear. "You've got your satellite phone, right? And the GPS tracker?" Her tone made me feel like a child being sent off to summer camp. I managed a faint smile. "All packed. I'll turn the tracker on as soon as I park. And I'll call you every evening when I set up camp, I promise." Maggie nodded, though the worry never left her eyes. She came down and wrapped me in a fierce embrace. "Please be safe out there. Come home soon." I clung to her tightly, wishing I didn't have to go, but we both knew I had no choice. I had to lay this to rest. Finally, I pulled myself away, gave her one last goodbye, and set off towards the looming forest in the distance. The drive to the North Woods took a few hours. It was a remote area, far past the outskirts of Blackwood. I had only been back a few times over the years, never staying longer than a day. It held too many painful memories, too many failures. As I turned off the main road onto the gravel access path, it felt like traveling back in time. The forest seemed untouched, immune to the changing world outside its borders. Memories flooded my mind, following behind Ellie on these trails as she led us deeper into the trees. Her turning back and grabbing my hand when she could tell I was scared, promising she would never let anything happen to me. I reached the small clearing that served as a makeshift parking area and trailhead, right where we had set off from on that fated trip. With a deep breath, I stepped out of the truck and into the past. The late summer air was still and heavy, the trees dense on all sides. I slung my pack over my shoulder and checked my compass bearing. Ellie had been adamant about pushing farther north than we had ever gone before. She was convinced there were isolated valleys and ravines no one else knew about. I both dreaded and needed to see this place again. The hike was grueling, especially with the added weight of supplies. I had to stop frequently to drink water and catch my breath. Doubt crept in. I wasn't a young kid anymore. Could I really handle being out here alone? No. I had come too far to turn back now. Finding answers was all that mattered. It was well past noon by the time I reached a ridge and saw the valley below. Our valley. I froze, staring down at the sweeping view of the forested hills rolling into the distance. It looked untouched, almost exactly as I remembered it, as if the past 20 years had never happened. My heart pounded as I made my way down into the valley. The clearing was overgrown now, with no signs left of the campsite. I dropped my pack and slowly turned in place, taking it all in. The trees, the mountains, the memories. In my mind, I could see Ellie joking and telling stories by the fire as she cooked our dinner. Could almost hear her voice on the wind. The image made my chest ache. This beautiful place had been forever tainted by what happened here. By my failure to protect my sister. With effort, I forced myself to focus. This wasn't about wandering through long-lost memories. I needed to search the area methodically, leaving no stone unturned. There had to be something here. Some piece of evidence. Some clue as to what happened that night. The answer was here. I could feel it. I spent the rest of the afternoon meticulously combing the campsite and surrounding woods. I knew these trees by heart already, but hoped time had uncovered some sign I had missed before. Somewhere there had to be a scrap of fabric, a necklace, anything Ellie left behind. Starting at the campsite itself, I searched every inch within a 100-foot radius. On hands and knees, I crawled through the underbrush, poking through dead leaves and moss in search of any small personal effect Ellie could have dropped. I kept hoping to uncover some memento buried under years of dust. That would mean she had been right here, in this very spot. Though finding nothing only increased my frustration, I forced myself to keep searching slowly and methodically. After an hour of combing the campsite turned up nothing, I moved my search out in concentric circles into the surrounding woods. I walked slowly, eyes trained on the ground, looking for any glint or shine that seemed out of place. Every few feet I would stop, kneel down, and carefully shift through the undergrowth, leaves, and detritus that blanketed the forest floor. I searched for any disturbances in the natural layout of the woods, a strange depression in the soil, a pile of stones that seemed deliberately placed. Some indicator Ellie had passed through and left her mark, but hour after hour my painstaking process revealed no evidence. As the afternoon wore on, I expanded my search wider and wider from the campsite epicenter. I knew these woods like the back of my hand from years of exhaustive searches, but still, I hoped somewhere I had missed some obvious sign. Somewhere Ellie had left a clue to what befell her that only I would recognize. In my desperation, I even veered off the grid pattern I had designed, instead letting hunches guide me this way and that between trees and underbrush. But no matter which direction some pull led me, the result was the same. Just a more unchanged, indifferent forest. By the time the sun dipped low towards the horizon, I had moved well beyond the perimeter of our old campsite in every direction. I had turned over every conceivable rock, branch, and tuft of moss that could possibly hold some hidden clue. And still, nothing. Not a single indication Ellie had even been here 20 years ago. Just endless, pristine nature, completely devoid of the answers I so desperately sought. Dejected, I slowly made my way back to the now unfamiliar campsite as the last light of dusk faded away. Sitting on a mossy log, I let the complete fruitlessness of the day's efforts wash over me. I had been so sure that returning here would unveil some piece of the puzzle, some hint of what happened to my sister. But once again, the woods had offered up nothing. Grief and frustration overwhelmed me. I put my head in my hands and sobbed for a while. When at last I regained a measure of composure, the campsite was fully shrouded in darkness. I gathered enough kindling and sticks to start a small fire, enough to heat water for my freeze-dried rations. Sitting by my small fire, I pulled out my satellite phone and called Maggie, knowing she would be worried. She sounded relieved to hear my voice. "Any sign of anything?" she asked tentatively, knowing the answer. "No, it's like the past 20 years never even happened here. I just feel so sure. The nightmares meant something. That I'd find some answer." "I know, sweetheart," Maggie sighed. "But you can't let dreams dictate your whole life. Maybe it's time to start letting go." I stared into the embers, the now familiar argument running through my head. But out here, surrounded by Ellie's ghost, I couldn't just let go. Not yet. "I need more time," I said simply. "There are more trails and ridges to check tomorrow. I'm not ready to turn back yet." Even over the phone, I could sense Maggie's sadness and worry. But she didn't argue. "Okay, Jason, just remember your promise to come home safe." I assured her I would and said goodnight. Alone again in the dark valley, I lingered by the fire, unwilling to face the empty tent. Out here, it almost felt like Ellie was still with me, as if she had just slipped away for a nighttime adventure and would soon come wandering back full of stories about what she had discovered. Finally, exhaustion won out, and I retreated to my tent. But sleep did not come easy. I kept imagining I heard Ellie's laughter on the wind or footsteps outside my tent. My mind was playing tricks, but I couldn't block out the sounds. Eventually, I slipped into a restless sleep, haunted by fractured dreams, flickering visions of Ellie calling my name, her outline glowing in the darkness. I tried to follow the sound of her voice, stumbling blindly through a cold void. But she remained always out of reach. Suddenly, I heard a shrill cry that seemed to echo through the trees. I froze, straining my ears. Had it just been my imagination? But no. There it was again, an unearthly howling coming from somewhere north of my camp. The haunting sound raised the hairs on my neck. No normal animal made cries like that. They wavered almost like human shrieks, but distorted into something more. The noises definitely seemed to be getting louder and closer. The awful wailing erupted again from several different directions at once, making it impossible to pinpoint the origin. I swung the flashlight beam around, seeing nothing but an empty forest. Still, the shrieking continued, sometimes interspersed with deep snarls that sounded almost amused. Like whatever was making the noises took pleasure in terrifying me. For hours I sat there paralyzed, listening as the cries surrounded the campsite. Sometimes they would retreat briefly, only to return louder than before. I had never felt so powerless and alone. Eventually, sometime in the early morning hours, silence gradually returned to the woods. The creatures, whatever they were, had tired of terrorizing me for the night. But I did not sleep, too rattled to do anything but anxiously watch the tent entrance, flashlight in hand. I knew I had to get far away from this valley at first light, someplace those chilling sounds could not follow. When faint rays of dawn finally crept across the tent ceiling, I gathered my gear, skipping breakfast in my hurry to escape the valley. Bloodshot and jittery from adrenaline and lack of sleep, I set off north. I hiked for hours, flinching at every snapped twig or rustle, but daylight seemed to keep the creatures at bay, for no further sounds pursued me, It was late afternoon by the time I stumbled upon a decrepit cabin between two towering pines, so overgrown it was nearly hidden. Though the roof sagged dangerously in places, it was better shelter than my tent. The inside was somehow even more dilapidated, covered in moss and moth-eaten furniture, but it would keep me safe for a night. And that was all that mattered. I swept away leaves and debris from one corner and gratefully unrolled my sleeping bag at last. As I set my gear and packed down, my flashlight glinted off something under a moldy tarp in the opposite corner. A faded splash of color that seemed out of place in the dismal cabin interior. I crossed over and lifted the covering to reveal a dusty teddy bear tucked into the debris. One beady eye was missing, and the fur was matted with age. But I recognized it immediately. Ellie's bear, handed down from our parents. What was it doing here? My hand shook slightly as I held the toy, a flood of childhood memories rushing back. Ellie took it everywhere, even on camping trips. She said it kept the nightmares away when we were in the woods. It couldn't be here by coincidence after all these years. I clutched the bear to my chest, feeling closer to Ellie in that moment than I had since losing her. She had been here, decades ago, clearly, but she had made it this far. This cabin had been her shelter. It gave me hope I might yet find evidence of where she went, what had happened to her. My excitement was short-lived, however, as a low rumble of thunder echoed through the trees outside. Within minutes, fat drops of rain were drumming steadily on the warped roof boards. Soon it intensified into a full-on downpour, rain cascading through cracks in the walls and ceiling. So much for having found secure shelter for the night. I retreated to the only relatively dry corner. At least I would stay mostly dry, though there was no chance of a fire in these conditions. As I sat listening to the downpour, I clutched Ellie's bear tightly. It was a small comfort, but gave me hope. The skies unleashed torrential rain all through the night. I dozed fitfully, still clutching the bear. Now and then I would awaken to thunder, but she had been alone and unprepared. At least I had 4 walls and a coat. When water began pooling around my feet, I retreated to the opposite corner, the highest ground in the cabin, but still the roof leaked steadily. There was no escaping the rain. At least the white noise of falling water drowned out any sounds from the forest that might otherwise have pursued me here. The long, wet night dragged on interminably. I passed the time talking aloud to Ellie's bear, sharing memories with it like we were kids again. Remembering her vibrant spirit, I apologized yet again for not protecting her that night. But finding her old toy felt like a sign I was on the right path. I would not stop until I uncovered the truth about what happened to my sister. Finally, around dawn, the rain tapered off, though daylight revealed several inches of standing water throughout the cabin's interior. Mosquitoes swarmed instantly in the muggy air as I gathered my soaked belongings. I tucked Ellie's bear safely into my pack and stepped out of the ruined cabin back into the muddy woods, rain still dripping from the leaves. Holding the worn teddy, I silently renewed my promise not to stop until I uncovered the truth of what happened to my sister. The terrain grew steeper and rockier as I continued north, moving farther from the valley where Ellie had vanished. By midday, I had covered several more miles with no further trace of Ellie's passage. As my socks and boots soaked through, discouragement began creeping back in. Perhaps finding the bear had only been a coincidence, not the breakthrough I'd hoped. Just as I paused to rest and wring the water from my socks, I noticed strange gouges in a boulder jutting from the muddy hillside. Kneeling down, I saw they were deliberate carvings, some kind of symbols or primitive writing. Hopeful again, I searched the area thoroughly until I found more carved stones creating a rough path through the undergrowth. The markings were cryptic, but their human origin was unmistakable. I had discovered a trail. Reinvigorated, I hurried along the carved stone path as it wound steadily downward into a ravine. The light grew dimmer as sheer rock walls closed in on both sides, leaving only a narrow opening ahead. Emerging from the ravine, I froze in awe at the towering cliff face before me. At its base gaped a massive cavern opening, partially obscured by hanging vines and roots. The entire perimeter was carved with intricate symbols and archaic writing. I approached slowly, heart hammering, but there was no doubt this was the same mysterious writing I had followed here. Ellie must have come this way too. I had to follow, despite every primal instinct warning me away. I flicked on my headlamp and ducked into the yawning cavern, its blackness swallowing me in an instant. The temperature plummeted as I squeezed through narrow stone passages. It felt like descending into the very heart of the mountain itself. My lamp only illuminated a few feet ahead at a time, leaving the rest in impenetrable darkness. It was like a nightmare where you run endlessly through the void, led on by some unseen force. Finally, I emerged into a massive chamber, open and still, atop an underground lake. Monolithic stone pillars surrounded me, coming out of sight towards a ceiling lost in darkness. My headlamp's feeble glow could not penetrate the vast blackness stretching endlessly before me. Anything could be lurking, watching from the darkness. I forced down my fear and crossed to examine the intricate carvings decorating the cavern walls. They depicted twisted, inhuman creatures locked in battle with primitive peoples. Meaningless symbols and glyphs were scrawled across every inch of stone. But what had once been a sacred site now felt cold and dead. As I reached the rear of the cavern, my light flashed across a spiral staircase cut into the rock, winding up to a stone altar on a raised dais. 2 massive statues framed the altar, their carved faces contorted in frozen screams. Crude bowls of rotted offerings lay at their feet. A prickling dread filled me as I ascended the stairs. There was a dark energy rooted here, centuries of fear and death absorbed into the very bones of this place. I knew instantly no benevolent being had been worshipped in this chamber. At the altar's center, carved deeply into the stone floor, was a single name: Ellie. For a moment the breath left my lungs. Somehow, impossibly, my sister had found her way here, long ago. But had she come willingly? Been brought before these dark idols as an offering? The ominous carvings surrounding her engraved name offered no answers, only new, troubling questions. I slowly descended the stairs on shaking legs, my mind racing to make sense of Ellie's presence in this buried catacomb. Clearly, she had encountered whatever evil festered here, perhaps even before her disappearance, sought temporary refuge within the stone walls and twisting passages. But it still did not explain what exactly happened that long ago night in the woods above, how Ellie went from our campsite to stumbling upon this hidden crypt, or if she ever emerged again. The inscrutable cavern yielded no definitive clues, only foreboding mystery. Lost in thought, I almost missed the debris cluttering the narrow gap in the rock on my way out. I crouched down, angling the lamplight to reveal the rusted remains of a small camp stove and lantern. Moss-eaten packets of freeze-dried food were scattered around them. Someone, perhaps Ellie, had been living down here for some time. I sat back against the damp cavern wall, letting this new revelation wash over me. Too many questions still remained. But clearly Ellie had been here in hiding at some point. I stuffed one of the food packets into my pack to show Maggie later, snapping a quick photo of Ellie's carved name as well. proof that I still walked in my sister's footsteps, even after all these years. My search felt reinvigorated with a new purpose. Answers were so close now, even if still shrouded in sinister mystery. With a last glance around the foreboding stone chamber that had been Ellie's refuge, I turned my light, again, down the passage that would lead back up to the surface. Rounding a curve, I froze. Something was shuffling towards me from the darkness ahead. I pressed against the damp rock walls, praying it would pass by. But the shuffling paused, then drew steadily closer. My skin crawled as a figure emerged into my lamplight. It had once been a man, but was now something far more twisted. He was hunched and rail-thin, barely more than walking bones. Its flesh was corpse-pale and hung loosely off his skeletally gaunt frame. But it was the head that made my breath catch in terror. The face was elongated with a massive underbite of crooked, jagged fangs. Its nose was practically non-existent, with slitted nostrils that flared and twitched. Bulging, milky eyes reflected the light eerily as they bored into me. Around its neck, the tattered remains of a woolen cowl clung to leathery flesh, implying it may have once been human. But no trace of humanity lingered in the creature's visage now. Only predatory instinct and teeth. I stood paralyzed as its mouth split into a grin, sniffing eagerly. Twisted claws extended from bony fingers, jagged yellow and crusted with ancient blood. It released a hiss and crept towards me, limbs twitching unnaturally. There would be no reasoning with this beast. It was soulless and driven by hunger. I saw the clawed swipe coming from yards away, but was helpless to avoid it in the narrow tunnel. Talons meant to disembowel slashed through my jacket with ease. I swung my pack desperately, gaining a slight break as the creature recoiled from the impact. But its patience showed no sign of breaking. It had stalked these burrows for centuries. I was just fresh meat. I tried to edge past the creature, but it matched me step for step, blocking my escape. In the tight space, defending myself was impossible. Soon my swings grew slower, while its claws rended my flesh with renewed frenzy. Rivulets of blood ran freely down my arms. Making a hopeless lunge past it, I lost my footing and tumbled into a lower section of the tunnel. My lamp skittered away, leaving only its weak glow to see by. But it was enough to glimpse the creature scuttling along the ceiling after me, unbound by mortal limitations. I was trapped in its lair. It crept down the wall, savoring my helplessness, as I felt along the icy stone for anything to use as a weapon. This ghoul would take its time with me, now we were cut off from the outside world. It dropped to the floor and slunk closer, milky eyes reflecting my fear back at me. My hands closed on a branch wedged into the rocks, likely washed down years before. I tore it loose as the creature sprang, swinging wildly. The heavy blow caught its barrel chest, eliciting a harsh shriek and halting its momentum just shy of my legs. But this only enraged it. Claws raked along my back as I landed a second frantic strike. In the confines of its killing den, my makeshift weapon barely hindered its relentless assault. I was tiring swiftly while its ancient evil drove it on, tirelessly. Already, my torn limbs burned with hot blood. I abandoned technique for desperate speed, thrashing my branch blindly, trying to drive the creature back enough to make a run for the tunnel. But escape seemed hopeless now. It had every advantage down here. But just as hope faded, Providence provided one last chance. My branch struck the weak ceiling, breaking loose a rain of stone shards and dirt that descended onto the creature's malformed head. It reeled back, clawing at its sunken eyes in rage and agony. I didn't wait to see if the distraction would last. Scrambling on all fours, I rushed desperately for freedom, heedless of the claws that tore at my legs in passing. I clambered into fresher air and blessed daylight, thighs burning and slick with my own blood. But I had escaped. From the darkness echoed chilling cries of the creature, but the sunlight seemed to form a barrier the creature could not cross. I was safe, for now. Every step was its own small agony as I limped my way back through the dimming forest. My shredded legs screamed in protest, but I grit my teeth and pushed onward. I had to make it to the refuge of the cabin before sunset. Being stranded out here helpless in the dark would mean certain death. Warm blood flowed steadily beneath my jeans from the creature's claws, but the wounds seemed more messy than deep, so I focused on keeping pressure and making steady progress towards shelter. The sun sinking rapidly behind the trees was my only concern now. I glanced down and had to stifle a rising panic. The leaf-strewn trail was sprouting disturbing red blossoms with every labored step. How much blood was I leaving as a trail right to the cabin door? Would it be enough to draw the pale ghoul from its lair if it emerged after nightfall? I shook off the thought and shuffled onward. No other options remained except the cabin. I was in no shape to hike to town even if I turned back now. I had to pray the ancient walls would hold through the long hours of darkness. Long enough for me to gather my strength again. The trees seemed more menacing than ever as I floundered between their reaching branches. Each small sound made me flinch and scan the lengthening shadows for pale, shifting shapes. But nothing pursued, for now. After what felt like hours, the cabin finally emerged between the pines as the last rays of sunlight faded behind the ridge. I barely had the strength remaining to sweep aside the barricade on the door before collapsing inside. Leaning against the battered furniture I had used to fortify the entrance, I let crushing exhaustion and pain overwhelm me for a moment. It had been so close, nearly my torn bones left to rot back in that lightless warren. Even now, a part of me wondered if it had been real, or just my fraying mind descending to madness. With effort, I dragged myself over to assess the damage by the dying evening light. My jeans were torn and soaked, sticking to the skin beneath. Gritting my teeth, I cut and peeled them away from 4 deep, ugly gashes along my thighs. Blood still oozed from the claw marks. I fumbled for my med kit to staunch the seeping red lines. Bandages helped, but I could tell they needed stitches beyond my field skills. As I worked, the shadows outside the dusty windows seemed to creep steadily inward like encroaching black waters. Soon, true night would drown the world, and with it any sense of safety. By the time I had wrapped my shredded legs as best I could, darkness had fallen completely. I leaned against the wall by the door, baton-like branch across my lap, jaw clenched against the throbbing agony. All I could do was wait helplessly for dawn. Outside, the woods were silent. Not an owl hooted nor leaf stirred, as if the trees themselves now held their breath, anticipating the horrors that night might bring. I wanted to get up and light a fire for comfort, but feared exposing my presence even to that small degree. Better to sit in chilling darkness and pray for sunrise. Time crawled by at a tortured pace. Every tiny creak of the decrepit cabin made my pulse race, imagining claws scraping up the outside walls. But nothing moved out there. Nothing cried or hissed. I must have dozed despite the pain, because a sharp crack nearby jolted me upright, gasping. The forest was still deathly quiet. Too quiet. Air seemed to buzz against my skin, as if a storm approached. But no clouds covered the waning moon above. This stillness held an unnatural charge. The crackling grew louder, branches splintering under steps, too slow and heavy to be any four-legged creature. I rose on shaky legs, branch gripped in bloodless knuckles. The thing I had prayed would not come was here. A long, low hiss pierced the silence as the footsteps halted disturbingly close beyond the barricaded door. My heart pounded against bruised ribs so hard I feared it would be audible to that which waited outside. But still, it only stood there, listening, savoring my terror. Despite the agony, I took a single sliding step closer to the door. Peering through a crack, I saw only a shifting moonlit forest, but I could feel the presence out there like a weight crushing the air from my lungs. It was toying with me, but it would not be satisfied just listening to my fear quicken. As if sensing my understanding, an eager snarl echoed from right against the warped wood panels. The broken window nearest me exploded inward, jagged glass raining as a pale, clawed hand shot through, grasping. I swung my branch wildly, feeling it connect through the opening. The answering shriek was less pain and more fury at being denied. My nerve broke. Lunging to the door, I threw my shoulder against the heavy furniture, moving it barely enough to squeeze outside into the open air once more. I would not cower helplessly as this demon tore me apart behind barricades. If it wanted me, it would face me first. I stood trembling but defiant in the moonlit clearing. Makeshift club raised in expectation of the hunched stalker's approach. Then I glimpsed it, creeping on all fours atop the cabin's sagging roof, hateful dead eyes glaring down. The thing let out an unnatural scream and launched itself off the roof at me. I dove out of the way just in time, feeling its claws swipe past inches from my neck. I swung my club wildly, connecting with its shoulder to knock it back, but it just shook off the blow and lunged again. The beast was on me in seconds, slicing up my arms and back with its talons. I smacked it repeatedly with my branch until it reeled off, dark blood dripping from its mouth. But the wounds barely slowed the creature down. It was between me and the cabin now. I had no choice but to run for it. I sprinted for the tree line, hearing the heavy footsteps chasing close behind. The creature herded me through the woods, keeping just on my heels. I couldn't stop or try to fight. I just had to run. My lungs burned as I crashed through the underbrush with no clue where I was headed. I just hoped I could lose the thing long enough to double back and make an escape. But its footsteps stayed right behind me, never letting up. Just when I thought my legs would collapse, the trees opened up into a small graveyard nestled against a rocky bluff. Headstones poked up through the weeds everywhere. I dashed toward the far end, hoping the creature would lose my scent amongst the graves. I wove desperately between the crumbling markers, making for a dark hole in the rock face, probably an old mine shaft or cave, a place I might be able to defend or at least hide. I was nearly there when I tripped over a half-buried stone and sprawled face first into the dirt. Before I could scramble up, a heavy weight smashed down between my shoulders, driving the breath from my lungs. I was pinned. The creature flipped me over, its filthy hair and rancid breath choking me as it moved in for the kill. I fumbled desperately in the dirt for anything to fight back with. My hand closed on a rock. With a surge of effort, I smashed the jagged stone up into the creature's face. It reared back, dark blood gushing from its eye. I struck again and again, finally knocking it off me as it flailed in pain. I pulled myself up, coughing dirt and gasping for breath. Behind me, the creature thrashed blindly, wailing an awful, high-pitched cry. I stumbled away, every muscle burning, determined to put distance between me and that thing. By the time I collapsed near the cave mouth, the creature's shrieks had faded into the night. I had no idea if I killed it or just wounded it, but I wasn't going back to find out. I crawled into the mine shaft, swallowed by welcoming darkness. When I finally emerged again at sunrise, the graveyard was still and quiet. No sign of the creature, dead or alive. I didn't let myself relax until I was well away from that God-forsaken place. Every inch of me ached from cuts and bruises as I limped home through the misty morning woods. My search was over, but there were still more questions than answers. All I had left was being alive. It was a bittersweet walk out of the valley that had claimed my sister and so many others. But the evil was destroyed at least. Those woods would keep their secrets. Ellie would remain one of them. That brought me some sad peace. I looked back just once at the dark tree line before turning onto the road. I was beaten to hell inside and out, but the nightmare was finished.